A cat asks the police for help, leads them, and when they arrive at the scene, they are horrified by what they see. A cool autumn morning wrapped Seattle in a misty veil, giving the city's ancient streets an air of mystery. Jack, an experienced and taciturn police officer, was on duty with his partner, Emily, a sharp detective with a past marked by personal tragedies. Life at the precinct moved at a monotonous rhythm. Minor neighborhood disputes, sporadic traffic accidents, and rare cases of theft. Seattle seemed to live in a bubble of tranquility. On this day, however, something unusual began to happen. Jack was sipping coffee in front of the precinct when he noticed a cat approaching. It was a black tomcat that always appeared and disappeared like a ghost, wandering around the main square. The animal's behavior this morning was different, though. The cat stared intently at Jack, as if trying to communicate with him. "Emily, look at this cat," Jack said, furrowing his brow. "There's something strange about it today." Emily, busy reviewing reports in the car, merely shook her head, not paying much attention. "It's probably hungry, as always." Jack, however, couldn't take his eyes off the animal. The cat let out a long, piercing meow, almost desperate, which echoed down the empty street. Something in that sound troubled him. The tomcat looked at Jack and Emily once more, before turning and slowly walking down the deserted street. It looked like it wanted them to follow. "He's trying to show us something," Jack insisted, quickly standing up. Emily, intrigued by her partner's persistence, finally relented. "All right, but if this is a waste of time, you owe me a coffee." The cat led the two police officers through narrow, poorly lit alleys, increasingly distant from the city center. As they followed the animal, a sense of unease grew within them. The silence was overwhelming, and the dark clouds that had earlier been distant seemed to be approaching the city, creating a heavy atmosphere. As they neared an abandoned industrial area, Emily began to suspect they were heading towards something they shouldn't see. "I don't like this," she muttered, looking around. "Something's not right." The cat finally stopped in front of an old warehouse, sealed with rusty padlocks. The building was in a state of decay, surrounded by tall grass and broken windows. The tomcat let out another meow, sharper this time, as if urging haste. "Why did it bring us here?" Emily asked, her heart beating fast. Jack, already intrigued, approached the door and to his surprise noticed that the padlock, though rusty, was loose. Someone had been here recently. He looked at Emily, who quietly nodded. When they opened the doors, they were greeted by a strong smell of mustiness and something even more unpleasant that they couldn't immediately identify. The place was empty, except for old crates and remnants of broken furniture scattered on the floor. The cat quickly entered, as if already knowing the way, and the police officers followed, illuminating the interior with their flashlights. As they moved forward, a feeling of discomfort overtook them. In a dark corner of the warehouse, they heard a noise, a slight scraping of something on the floor. Jack looked at Emily, who had wide eyes, and signaled her to follow him carefully. As they approached the source of the sound, they saw a partially open wooden crate. Inside were children's clothes, small coats, little shoes, and other items carelessly thrown in. Emily froze for a moment. "What is this?" she whispered, picking up one of the garments. Jack, still processing this discovery, looked around for more clues. The cat, standing next to the crate, watched attentively. There was something else in the room. Suddenly, a louder noise came from deep within the warehouse, as if something heavy was being moved. Jack and Emily prepared themselves for anything. They followed the sound to metal doors, partially ajar, leading to another room. The strong smell they had detected since entering became even more intense here, almost unbearable. Jack carefully pushed the door, revealing a small, dimly lit room. More clothes lay on the floor and dark stains were spread across the concrete. They knew what those stains meant, but what was in the back of the room made them hesitate. A human figure, partially covered by a dirty tarp. Emily put her hand to her mouth, fighting the urge to vomit. "Dear God," Jack whispered, trying to process the scene before him. The body seemed to have been lying there for days, maybe weeks. But something about the clothing caught Jack's attention. This person wasn't homeless or in a difficult life situation. They wore decent clothes, and in their hands they held something that immediately caught Jack's eye, a small gold chain with a cross. "Who could this be?" Emily asked, still trying to compose herself. Jack, leaning down, looked closer at the necklace, carefully pulling it. He saw something familiar in the design of the cross. It was a unique piece, and Jack recognized the pattern. He had seen something similar many years ago, but couldn't exactly remember where. At that moment, the cat let out another long meow, breaking the tense silence in the room. Emily instinctively looked towards the warehouse entrance. From outside came the sound of hurried footsteps. "Someone's coming," she said, pulling Jack to get out of there. They quickly turned off their flashlights and hid behind crates, watching as a tall figure dressed in black entered the warehouse. The man seemed to be looking for something, or someone. Jack and Emily exchanged glances, aware of the danger. As the man approached the body, he paused for a moment, looking at the cat that remained by the corpse. Without hesitation, he took something out of his jacket, a weapon. It was a moment of truth. Jack and Emily, realizing time was running out, began to slowly retreat towards the exit. However, before they could escape, the cat let out a loud meow, drawing the man's attention to where they were hiding. He quickly turned, staring at the spot where the two police officers were. Emily felt her heart race, and Jack knew they had no other choice. With one quick motion, they ran towards the side doors of the warehouse, hearing the man's footsteps following them. Bullets began to echo through the warehouse as they barely managed to escape. The chase continued through the empty city streets, as Jack and Emily tried to put as much distance as possible between themselves and the warehouse. But something inside them said that this mystery was far from being solved. Jack and Emily's hearts were pounding as they ran through the dark alleys of Seattle. The sounds of pursuit seemed to be fading, but both knew they couldn't stop. After a few minutes of frantic running, Emily pulled Jack by the sleeve, pointing to a narrow alley between two old buildings. "Here," she gasped, pulling her partner into the shadows. They pressed themselves against the cold wall, trying to calm their breathing and listening for their pursuers' footsteps. Silence. Only the distant hum of cars and the morning birdsong broke the quiet. After several long minutes, Jack dared to peek around the corner. The street was empty. "I think we lost him," he whispered, still alert. Emily nodded, but her eyes were full of concern. "What the hell was that, Jack?" she asked when she finally regained her voice. "That warehouse, those clothes, and that man." Jack shook his head, his face serious. "I don't know, Em, but whatever it is, it's something big. We need to be careful." They slowly emerged from hiding, nervously looking around. The city was coming to life, with the first pedestrians starting to appear on the streets. Jack and Emily tried to blend into the crowd, heading towards the police station. "We can't tell anyone about this," Jack said quietly as they approached the police building. "At least not yet. We don't know who we can trust." Emily nodded, though it was clear this decision troubled her. "What about what we saw, that body?" Jack sighed heavily. "We need to investigate this on our own. Something tells me this is just the beginning of something much bigger." They entered the precinct, trying to act normal. Colleagues greeted them as usual, unaware of the dramatic events they had just experienced. Jack and Emily exchanged meaningful glances, knowing that their lives had just drastically changed. Throughout the day, they tried to focus on routine matters, but their thoughts kept returning to the warehouse and the mysterious man. Emily noticed that Jack kept touching his pocket, where he had put the found chain with the cross. Late in the afternoon, when most officers had already left, Jack nodded to Emily. They locked themselves in a small interrogation room where they could talk without fear of being overheard. "This cross," Jack began, placing the chain on the table. "There's something familiar about it, but I can't remember where from." Emily looked closely at the jewelry. The cross was small but richly decorated, with delicate patterns engraved on the surface. "This looks like the work of a jeweler," she observed, "and a good one. Maybe this could lead us to the owner." Jack nodded. "Good idea. But we need to be careful. We don't know what we've gotten ourselves into." They spent the next few hours searching databases, looking for similar crosses and checking local jewelry stores. However, their search yielded no results. "This doesn't make sense," sighed a frustrated Emily, leaning back in her chair. "How can something so distinctive not leave any trace?" Jack was silent for a moment, his eyes focused on the cross. Suddenly he straightened up, as if remembering something. "Wait," he said, reaching for his phone. "I think I know who might be able to help us." He dialed a number and waited. After a few rings, an elderly voice answered. "Hello? Who's speaking?" "Mr. Thompson. This is Jack Harris. Do you remember me?" There was a short pause. "Jack, the young police officer who helped me find my missing grandson? Of course I remember. What can I do for you, son?" Jack smiled slightly. "I need your help, Mr. Thompson. It's about a certain cross." The old jeweler listened carefully as Jack described the found object. Emily watched as her partner's face changed with each moment. "I see," Jack finally said. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson. This will really help our investigation." When he ended the call, Emily looked at him expectantly. "Well?" she asked, unable to bear the suspense any longer. Jack took a deep breath. "This cross, it's part of a series that Mr. Thompson made almost 30 years ago. There were only 5 of them, all for one family." "What family?" Emily leaned forward, feeling they were getting close to something important. "The Wilsons," Jack replied, his voice tense. "Are one of the most influential families in Seattle in the 90s. Emily frowned. "The Wilsons? Isn't that the family that—" Jack finished for her. "Yes, the same one. The family that lost everything under mysterious circumstances 25 years ago. Their fortune disappeared, and they themselves just vanished into thin air." Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. "You think what we found in the warehouse could be the key to solving this old case?" Jack nodded. "Oh, but that's not all. Mr. Thompson told me something else. One of these crosses belonged to a young boy, the Wilsons and son, a boy who disappeared just before the family vanished." Emily felt her heart quicken. "So the man in the warehouse could have been that boy," Jack finished, his voice quiet but full of emotion, the adult version of the missing Wilson child. They sat in silence, trying to process this information. The case, which initially seemed like a simple, albeit disturbing discovery, suddenly took on a whole new dimension. "What now?" Emily finally asked. Jack stood up, his face full of determination. "Now we need to find out what really happened to the Wilson family 25 years ago, and why someone wanted us to find that body now." As they left the interrogation room, both felt the weight of the mystery they had uncovered. They didn't yet know how deep the roots of this case ran, but they were determined to uncover the truth, even if it threatened their careers or their lives. The next days were like walking a tightrope for Jack and Emily. On one hand, they had to maintain the appearance of normalcy at work. On the other, they devoted every free moment to delving into the mystery of the Wilson family. They spent nights reviewing old files, looking for connections, and trying to understand what could have happened 25 years ago. "This doesn't make sense," Emily sighed, putting down another folder. They were sitting in Jack's apartment, surrounded by piles of documents. "How is it possible that an entire family just disappeared and nobody saw anything?" Jack rubbed his tired eyes. "We must be missing something. A family as influential as the Wilsons couldn't have vanished without a trace." Suddenly, Emily straightened up, her eyes shining. "Jack, look at this," she said, pushing an old newspaper clipping towards him. "It's an article about the opening of a new hospital wing, funded by the Wilsons, but look at the photo." Jack examined the photograph carefully. It showed the opening ceremony, with the Wilson family at the center. But his attention was drawn to a figure standing in the background, a tall, slim man with a piercing gaze. "I know that face," he said slowly. It's impossible." Emily nodded. "It's the same man we saw in the warehouse, except this picture is from 25 years ago." Jack felt a chill run down his spine. "How is that possible? Who is he?" "I don't know," Emily replied, "but this could be the key to the whole case." The next day, under the pretext of a routine investigation, they went to the city archives. The elderly archivist, Mr. Parker, greeted them with a smile. "How can I help our brave police officers?" he asked. Winking good-naturedly, Jack showed him the photo. "We're looking for information about this man," he said, pointing to the mysterious figure in the background. "We know he was somehow connected to the Wilson family." Mr. Parker squinted, examining the photograph. His face suddenly paled. "Where did you get this photo?" he asked quietly, looking around nervously. Jack and Emily exchanged glances. "It's part of our investigation," Emily answered cautiously. "Kiasi, do you know this man?" The old archivist sighed heavily. "I do, and I advise you, young people, to leave this matter alone. Some secrets should remain secrets." But Jack wouldn't give up. "Please, sir, this could be a matter of life and death. We need to know who he is." Mr. Parker was silent for a long moment, as if fighting an internal battle. Finally, he nodded. "All right," he said quietly, "but not here. Let's meet in the evening at the park by the lake. It'll be safer there." As darkness fell, Jack and Emily waited at the agreed spot. The park was almost empty, with only the distant city lights casting a pale glow on the paths. Finally, they saw Mr. Parker's approaching figure. "I apologize for these precautions," he said, sitting down next to them on a bench. "But this matter, it goes deeper than you can imagine." He began to speak quietly, his voice barely audible above the rustle of wind in the trees. "The man you're looking for is called Alexander Black. At least that's how I knew him. He was a kind of consultant for the Wilson family, but not an ordinary consultant. He dealt with matters that no one wanted to talk about openly." Jack leaned forward. "What kind of matters?" Mr. Parker shook his head. "You're better off not knowing. But I'll tell you this much. Black had contacts everywhere. In the police, in the courts, even in the government. He was like a shadow, always present but never in the foreground." "What happened to the Wilson family?" Emily asked. The old archivist sighed. "No one knows for sure, but there were rumors. They said the Wilsons wanted to pull out of certain businesses, that they threatened Black and then they just disappeared." Jack and Emily exchanged glances. This fit their theory, but there were still too many unknowns. "And what about the Wilsons' son?" Jack asked. "The one who disappeared just before the family vanished." Mr. Parker shuddered slightly. "That was the saddest part of this story. Young Thomas, a good boy. They said he discovered something he shouldn't have seen, and that's why the family wanted to pull out." A heavy silence fell. In the distance, an owl hooted, making all three of them jump. "Listen," Mr. Parker suddenly said, his voice tense. "You shouldn't be digging into this. Black. He might still be in Seattle. And if he finds out someone's poking around in the past..." He didn't finish, but he didn't need to. The implication was clear. Jack placed a hand on the older man's shoulder. "Thank you for your help, Mr. Parker. We promise we'll be careful." As the archivist left, Jack and Emily remained on the bench, trying to digest what they had learned. "What now?" Emily asked quietly. Jack stared at the dark waters of the lake. "Now we need to find Black. He's the key to everything." "But how? If what Parker said is true, Black could be anywhere. He might even be watching us now." Jack nodded. "I know. But we have one advantage. He doesn't know that we know. We have to use that." They stood up, looking around cautiously. The park suddenly seemed full of hidden dangers, every shadow potentially concealing an enemy. "Emily," Jack said quietly as they walked towards the lit street. "Whatever happens, we need to trust each other. We can only solve this together." Emily squeezed his hand. "I know. Together till the end, partner." They left the park, unaware that their conversation had not escaped a pair of watchful eyes. In the shadow of the trees stood a motionless figure, observing the departing police officers. When they disappeared from view, the mysterious person took out a phone. "Boss," a quiet voice spoke. "We have a problem. They're reviewing files. If Black has moles in the police..." Jack nodded, his face tense. "I know, but we need to find some lead, something that will lead us to Black." Their thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. A young officer, Peter, entered with an envelope in hand. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, looking around nervously. "But this came for you. No sender." Jack carefully took the envelope, exchanging a meaningful look with Emily. When Peter left, Tally opened the package. Inside was just a piece of paper with an address and a time, nothing more. "This could be a trap," Emily warned. Jack examined the card under the light. "Maybe, but it might also be our only chance to push the investigation forward." After a long discussion, they decided to go to the indicated address. It turned out to be an old, abandoned factory building on the outskirts of the city. When they arrived, the sun was already setting, casting long shadows on the overgrown parking lot. "Stay alert," Jack whispered, as they carefully approached the entrance. The interior of the factory was dark and full of echoes. Each of their steps reverberated loudly off the concrete walls. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows. "I'm glad you came," a woman's voice spoke. Jack and Emily instinctively reached for their weapons, but the woman raised her hands in surrender. "Easy," she said. "I'm on your side." As she stepped into the light, they saw a middle-aged woman with a tired face and keen eyes. "Who are you?" Jack asked, still keeping his hand on his weapon. "My name is Sarah Wilson," the woman replied. I was Thomas Wilson's wife." Emily gasped in surprise. "But all the Wilsons disappeared 25 years ago." Sarah smiled sadly. "Not all of us. Some of us had to disappear on our own." Over the next hour, Sarah told them a story that left them stunned, about how the Wilson family discovered that Alexander Black was using their influence and wealth to build a criminal empire, how Thomas, her husband, found evidence of Black's illegal activities and wanted to expose him. "But Black was always one step ahead of us," Sarah said, her voice trembling with emotion. "Before Thomas could do anything, Black struck. I had to flee, change my identity, leave everything behind." Jack and Emily listened in silence, trying to process this information. "Why now?" Jack finally asked. "Why, after 25 years, did you decide to come forward?" Sarah sighed heavily. "Because Black has resurfaced, and I'm afraid history might repeat itself." She pulled out a stack of documents from her bag. "These are the evidences Thomas gathered all those years ago. For 25 years, I've been hiding them, waiting for the right moment." Emily flipped through the documents with growing astonishment. This is incredible. We have evidence of corruption at the highest levels, money laundering, even—" "Enough," Jack interrupted her, looking around nervously. "Not here, it's too dangerous a place." Sarah nodded. "You're right, but you need to know one thing. Black doesn't work alone. He has a network of collaborators, people in high positions. If Black has moles in the police, this might be our only chance," Sarah finished. "Sometimes you have to risk everything to win." As they left the factory, night had already fallen. The city in the distance glimmered with lights, unaware of the drama unfolding in its shadow. "From this moment on, we're in the crosshairs," Jack said quietly. "We need to be ready for anything." Emily squeezed his hand. "Together, we can do this. The truth always comes out." Sarah looked at them with a mixture of admiration and sadness. "I hope so. For all our sakes." They got into the car and headed towards the city, aware that from this moment on, their lives would never be the same. Behind them, in the shadows of the abandoned factory, a pair of eyes watched their departure. The mysterious figure took out a phone. "Boss, we have a problem. Wilson has surfaced, and she has the documents." The voice on the phone was cold as ice. "Take care of it, immediately." As Jack and Emily's car disappeared around the bend, the mysterious figure set off after them, vanishing into the night. The game was just beginning, and the stakes were higher than ever. The next morning, Jack and Emily met in a small cafe on the outskirts of the city, away from the watchful eyes of their colleagues at the precinct. Sarah Wilson joined them a few minutes later, nervously looking around. "We need to act fast," she said quietly, sitting at their table. "Black surely knows by now that we've met." Jack nodded, his face serious. "I agree, but we need to be careful. One false move and everything will be lost." Emily pulled out a notebook. "Okay, let's establish a plan. First, we need to secure the evidence you gave us, Sarah." "I've already taken care of that," Jack replied. Oh, I made copies and hid them in a safe place. The originals are in a safe at my trusted friend's place. Sarah looked slightly calmer. Good. What about Commissioner Davis? Do you think we can trust him? Emily sighed. It's risky, but I don't think we have a choice. We need someone in a high position who can help us. Jack looked at his watch. I've arranged to meet him this afternoon. I told him it's a matter of utmost importance. Suddenly Sarah froze, staring out the window. I don't want to alarm you, but that car, it's been there since I arrived. Jack and Emily discreetly glanced in the direction Sarah indicated. Indeed, a black sedan parked across the street looked suspicious. Stay calm, Jack whispered. Act normal. Emily, you leave first. Sarah and I will leave a few minutes after you. Emily nodded, calmly finishing her coffee. After a moment, she stood up, smiled at them, and left the cafe. Jack watched as she passed the suspicious car. Nothing happened. Okay, now us in, he said, standing up. Sarah, stay close to me. They went out onto the street, pretending to be an ordinary couple, but before they could take a few steps, they heard the screech of tires. The black sedan suddenly accelerated towards them. Run, Jack shouted, pushing Sarah towards a side alley. They ran as fast as they could, hearing the sounds of pursuit behind them. Jack knew they had to lose their pursuers before reaching a safe place. This way, he called, pulling Sarah towards a busy marketplace. They plunged into the crowd, weaving between stalls and confused pedestrians. Jack could hear curses and shouts behind them. Apparently their pursuers were having trouble pushing through the dense crowd. After a few minutes of frantic running, Jack pulled Sarah towards an old tenement house. Here, quickly. They ran into the building and climbed to the second floor. Jack knocked urgently on one of the doors. Who's there? They heard a concerned voice from the other side. It's me, Jack. Open up, quick. The door opened, revealing the surprised face of an older man. Jack, what's going on? Sorry, Mr. Thompson, but we need shelter, Jack said, pulling Sarah inside and quickly closing the door. The older Mr. Thompson, unrelated to Sarah's family, was a retired police officer and Jack's mentor from his academy days. Now he looked at them with a mixture of surprise and concern. Jack, what have you gotten yourself into? He asked, leading them to the living room. It's a long story, Mr. Thompson, Jack sighed, but please trust me. It's a matter of utmost importance. Sarah looked around nervously. How do you think we lost them? Jack went to the window and carefully looked out onto the street. For now, yes, but we can't stay here long. I need to contact Emily. He took out his phone and sent an encrypted message to his partner. After a moment, he received a reply. Emily is safe, he said with relief. She managed to reach Commissioner Davis. They're supposed to meet us at the agreed place in 2 hours. Sarah sank into an armchair, clearly exhausted. What now? Jack sat across from her, his face serious. Now we need to prepare for a confrontation. Black knows we have the evidence. He'll stop at nothing to get it. Mr. Thompson, who had been listening in silence until now, spoke up. Jack, do you realize what a dangerous game you've gotten yourself into? Jack looked at his mentor. I know, Mr. Thompson, but this might be our only chance to put an end to Black's activities. He's been terrorizing this city for too long. The older man sighed, then stood up and went to an old dresser. He opened a drawer and took out a gun. I never thought I'd have to use it again, he said, handing the weapon to Jack. But if what you're saying is true, you're going to need it. Jack took the gun, feeling the weight not only of the weapon but also of the responsibility that rested on him. Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Sarah looked at them with a mixture of fear and determination. Do you really think we can defeat him? Jack looked her straight in the eyes. We have to try. For Thomas, for all of Black's victims, and for the future of this city. They sat in silence for the next few minutes, each lost in their own thoughts. They knew that the coming hours could change everything. The stakes were enormous, and the danger was real. Suddenly, the silence was broken by the sound of Jack's phone. It was Emily. Jack, we have a problem. Her voice sounded tense. Davis, he's not who we thought he was. It's a trap. Jack felt the blood drain from his face. What do you mean? He works for Black, Emily whispered. I realized it at the last moment. I escaped, but they They know about our meeting place, Jack cursed quietly. Where are you now? In a safe place. But Jack, they're coming. And they know about Sarah. Jack looked at Sarah, who was watching him with growing concern. He knew they had to act quickly. Listen, Emily, he said, trying to keep calm. Change of plans. Let's meet at the place we talked about in case of an emergency. You know which one. I understand, Emily replied. Be careful. As Jack ended the call, he turned to Sarah and Mr. Thompson. We need to move. Now, he looked out the window and saw that the street was still quiet, but he knew it was just the calm before the storm. Sarah, he said, turning to the woman, what's about to happen will be dangerous. If you want to back out, I'll understand. Sarah stood up, her eyes shining with determination. No, I've come too far to give up now. We'll do this together. Jack nodded, feeling a surge of gratitude and admiration for her courage. All right then, let's go. It's time to face Black. As they left Mr. Thompson's apartment, they knew they were entering the most dangerous phase of their mission, but they were also aware that this might be their only chance to reveal the truth and restore justice. Night was falling over Seattle, and the city, unaware of the drama unfolding in its heart, was slowly preparing for sleep. For Jack, Emily, and Sarah, however, the longest night of their lives was just beginning. Night enveloped Seattle in a dark cloak as Jack, Sarah, and Mr. Thompson carefully traversed the city streets. Every shadow seemed to hide a potential threat, and the night's silence was broken only by the distant hum of cars and their own quickened breaths. Where are we going? Sarah whispered. Nervously looking around, Jack pointed to the distant outline of an old, abandoned mill on the shore of Lake Washington. There. That's the place Emily and I talked about. The old Fremont Mill. Mr. Thompson furrowed his brow. Fremont Mill, but that place has been abandoned for years. That's exactly why it's perfect, Jack replied. No one will look for us there. As they approached their destination, Jack felt his phone vibrate. A message from Emily. I'm here. Be careful. I've seen suspicious movements in the area. Jack clenched his jaw. He knew they were walking straight into the lion's den, but they had no choice. This was their only chance to confront Black and reveal the truth. When they reached the mill, they carefully entered. The interior was dark and full of dust, but in the distance, they spotted a faint light. Emily was waiting for them on the upper floor, holding a small flashlight. I'm glad you're here, she said with relief when they met. We need to act quickly. Davis could be here any moment. Jack nodded. All right, Sarah, show us those documents. We need to review them before... He didn't get to finish. Suddenly, they heard a noise coming from below. Someone had entered the mill. Hide, Jack hissed, turning off the flashlight. They hid behind old machines, watching the stairs. After a moment, they saw the silhouette of a man coming up to the upper floor. In the weak moonlight falling through the dusty windows, they recognized Commissioner Davis. I know you're here, Davis called out. Come out. And I promise no one will get hurt. Jack exchanged glances with Emily. They knew it was a lie, but they also realized they had no choice. Slowly, they emerged from hiding, hands raised. Davis, Jack said, trying to keep calm. Why? Why are you working for Black? The commissioner laughed bitterly. You have no idea what you've gotten yourselves into. Black controls everything. The city, the police, the courts. You don't stand a chance. Sarah stepped forward. Thin man with grey hair and a piercing gaze entered the upper floor. Jack immediately recognized him from the old photos. It was Alexander Black. Bravo, bravo, Black said, clapping slowly. I must admit, I haven't had such interesting opponents in a long time. Jack felt his heart quicken. This was the moment they had been waiting for. They were face to face with the man responsible for so much suffering. Black, he said, trying to make his voice sound confident. Game over. We have evidence of all your crimes. Black smiled, but his eyes remained cold. Really? And what exactly do you have? Sarah pulled out a stack of documents from her bag. We have this. Evidence of your corruption, money laundering, blackmail, everything my husband gathered before his unfortunate accident, Black finished, raising an eyebrow. Yes, I remember young Thomas, so idealistic, so naive. Jack noticed Sarah's hands trembling with anger. He had to act quickly before the situation got out of control. "Listen, Black," he said, taking a step forward. "We know you have influence, but this evidence, it's already safe. Even if something happens to us, the truth will come out." Black was silent for a moment, his face unreadable. Finally, he sighed. "You know, I've always wondered what it would be like if I had met someone like you earlier. Someone who truly believes in justice." Emily frowned. "What do you mean?" Black walked to the dusty window, staring out at the night city. "You think I'm a monster, but the truth is, this city was rotten long before I arrived. I just took advantage of the situation." "That doesn't justify your actions," Jack said firmly. Black turned to face them. "No, but maybe it will help you understand. You see, in this world, there are wolves and sheep. I simply chose which one I wanted to be." Sarah shook her head. "My husband believed we could change this world, that we could fight corruption and injustice." "And where did that lead him?" Black asked quietly. A heavy silence fell. Jack felt the tension in the room rising. He knew they were standing on the edge. One false move could destroy everything. Suddenly Davis, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "Boss, maybe we should—" He didn't get to finish. A noise came from below, and a moment later several armed men burst onto the upper floor. "Police!" one of them shouted. "Everyone on the ground." The chaos that ensued was indescribable. Jack instinctively threw himself to shield Sarah. Emily tried to reach for her weapon, but one of the officers stopped her. Davis stood paralyzed, and Black disappeared in the commotion. When the dust settled, Jack realized that the mill was surrounded by police. Shouts and sounds of struggle came from below. Apparently, Black's people were trying to break through. "Jack Harris?" one of the officers asked, approaching him. Jack nodded, still dazed. "I'm Detective Simmons from the FBI. We got a tip about an illegal meeting at this location, but it looks like we've stumbled onto something much bigger." Jack looked at Emily, then at Sarah. In their eyes, he saw the same mixture of relief and disbelief that he felt himself. "Detective," he said slowly, "you're right. This is something much, much bigger." As they were led out of the mill, Jack noticed that Davis was being handcuffed, but his thoughts were elsewhere. Black had escaped, true, but they had the evidence, they had the truth, and they knew this was just the beginning. The night over Seattle slowly gave way to the first rays of dawn. For Jack, Emily, and Sarah, it was the beginning of a new day and a new fight. A fight for justice, for truth, and for a better tomorrow for their city. A week had passed since the dramatic events at the old mill. Seattle was slowly returning to normal, but for Jack, Emily, and Sarah, nothing was the same anymore. They sat in a small cafe, the same one where they had first met, trying to sort out their thoughts and emotions. "I still can't believe this is happening," Sarah said, turning a coffee cup in her hands. "After all these years, the truth is finally coming out," Jack nodded. "It's just the beginning, but yes, we're finally moving forward." Emily spread a newspaper on the table. The headline screamed, "Major Corruption Scandal in Seattle. Arrests at Highest Levels." "Davis is singing like a canary," she said, pointing to the article. "He's giving up all his accomplices." "What about Black?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling slightly. Jack sighed. "They're still looking for him. But with each day, the noose tightens around him. His empire is crumbling." Suddenly, Detective Simmons entered the cafe. He nodded to them and approached their table. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, sitting down, "but I have information that might interest you." All three leaned forward, holding their breath. "We've found Black," the detective announced. Sarah gasped, and Jack felt his heart quicken. "Where?" "In a small village in southern France," Simmons replied. "He was trying to escape to Africa, but our French colleagues were faster." Emily shook her head in disbelief. That's amazing. What now?" "Now," said the detective, "the real work begins. Extradition, trials. It will take months, maybe years. But one thing is certain. Black will never be a free man again." Sarah buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. Jack gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "It's over, Sarah," he said quietly. "Your husband, Thomas, his sacrifice wasn't in vain." Sarah looked up, tears glistening in her eyes, but also determination. "No," she said. "This isn't the end, it's just the beginning." Detective Simmons nodded approvingly. "You're right, Mrs. Wilson. We have a long road ahead of us to clean up this city. But with people like you, we have a chance of success." The next days passed in a whirlwind. Jack and Emily were interrogated, gave testimonies, helped with the investigation. Sarah, with her knowledge of Black's past, proved to be an invaluable source of information. A week later, when emotions had somewhat subsided, they met again, this time in Jack's office at the precinct. On the desk lay a thick stack of documents, their testimonies, evidence, years of work and sacrifices gathered into one report. "This is everything," Jack said, looking at the folder. "The whole truth about Black and his organization." Emily ran her finger along the cover. "It's hard to believe it's finally over." "No," Sarah said, and there was a new strength in her voice. "This isn't the end, it's a new beginning, for all of us." Jack looked at her with admiration. Sarah, who just a few weeks ago had been a shadow of herself, now radiated strength and determination. "What do you plan to do now?" he asked. Sarah smiled slightly. "I've been thinking about it a lot. I want to start a foundation, the Thomas Wilson Foundation. We'll help victims of corruption, support investigative journalists, educate young people." Emily clapped her hands. "That's a wonderful idea." Jack felt hope growing in his heart. "You know what, Sarah? I think that's exactly what this city needs." Suddenly, young Officer Peter entered the office. "Sorry to interrupt you," he said, "but there's someone here who wants to see you." An older man with a tired but dignified face entered the room. Sarah gasped in surprise. "Dad," she whispered. Mr. Wilson, Thomas's father, stood in the doorway, his eyes full of tears. "Sarah," he said in a trembling voice, we thought you were dead." Sarah ran to him, enveloping him in an embrace. For several minutes, the only sounds in the office were their quiet crying and whispers. Jack and Emily exchanged emotional glances. This was a moment worth fighting for. When emotions had somewhat subsided, Mr. Wilson turned to Jack and Emily. "I don't know how to thank you," he said, "for uncovering the truth, for bringing my daughter back to me." Jack shook his head. "We should be thanking you, Mr. Wilson. Your son, he was a hero. He started this fight. We just finished it." Sarah, still holding her father's hand, looked at all of them. "I think we should celebrate this," she said, "not just our victory, but the memory of Thomas and all those who suffered under Black's rule." Emily smiled. "You're right. It's a good moment to look to the future." They left the precinct together, heading towards the downtown area. The sun was setting over Seattle, casting a warm light on the old buildings and church towers. As they walked through the city center, Jack noticed that people were looking at them differently. With respect, with gratitude, news of their role in bringing down Black's empire had spread quickly. "You know what?" Jack said, stopping in the middle of the street. "I think this city has a bright future ahead of it." Sarah nodded. "Yes, but we have to fight for it. Every day." "And we will," Emily added. "Together." They stood there for a moment, looking at their city in a new light, a city that had gone through darkness and come out on the other side, stronger and more united than ever. Mr. Wilson cleared his throat. "I think Thomas would be proud of all of you, Sarah, and of you, young guardians of the law." Jack felt emotion tightening his throat. "Thank you, Mr. Wilson. That means a lot to us." As they headed towards a restaurant to celebrate their victory, Jack knew that this wasn't the end of their story. It was the beginning of a new chapter, for them, for Seattle, and for all those who dream of a just world. Night was falling over the city, but for Jack, Emily, and Sarah, it was the beginning of a new day, a day full of hope, courage, and determination to make the world a better place. And somewhere out there, in the world of spirits, Thomas Wilson smiled, knowing that his sacrifice had not been in vain. The truth had triumphed, and the light of justice had illuminated the shadows of Seattle. Dear listeners, we hope that the story of Jack, Emily, and Sarah has touched your hearts and minds. Their fight for truth and justice in Seattle is a tale that reminds us that even in the darkest times, the light of hope can illuminate the darkness. But remember, this story doesn't end with the last chapter. Just as Jack and Emily didn't stop fighting for a better tomorrow, we invite you to continue this journey. We've prepared a special playlist with similarly fascinating stories that explore themes of courage, justice, and the strength of the human spirit. You can find it by clicking on the link to the left. If this story has touched your hearts, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give a thumbs up to this recording. We bring you new, unique stories every day that delve into the complexity of life and show that each of us can be the hero of our own story. Perhaps you have your own stories about fighting injustice, or ideas on how Sarah could develop her foundation. We're waiting for your comments. Share your thoughts and let our community grow and inspire each other. Remember, just as Jack, Emily, and Sarah discovered that together they could change their city, so can we, together, make our world a better place. Every comment, every share, every subscription is a step towards building a community of people who believe in the power of truth and justice. Don't miss our next stories. Who knows, maybe the next tale will inspire you to embark on your own mission, to fight for what you believe in. Thank you for being with us on this journey through the streets of Seattle. This is just the beginning. Stay with us and help us spread the light of truth in every corner of our world. Until the next story.